I cleaned offices for 11 years to pay for a degree I was told I was too old to finish. I graduated last May at 47. My mother was in the audience. She had never been on an airplane before the flight she took to watch me walk across that stage. I want to start there because that image, my mother on an airplane for the first time at 71 years old, sitting in an auditorium in Ohio, holding a small American flag someone had given her outside, watching her daughter receive a degree in civil engineering. That image is the whole story. Everything else is just the path that led to it. My name is Elena Vasquez. I was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, and I came to the United States 23 years ago at 24 years old, on a work visa that I extended and renewed and eventually converted, through a process that cost me 7 years of paperwork and 3 attorneys and a sum of money I do not want to calculate, into a green card, and then, 11 years ago, into citizenship. I took my oath in a courthouse in Columbus, Ohio, on a Tuesday morning in November, and I cried through the entire ceremony in a way I had not planned on and could not stop. And the woman beside me, a woman from the Philippines who was also crying, reached over and held my hand without asking, and we stood there holding hands through the pledge, and I did not know her name, and it did not matter. I am going to tell you about the degree because that is the story. But I need to tell you about why it was interrupted first, because the interruption is the part that took the longest and the part I think about the most. I started studying engineering in Mexico at the Universidad de Guadalajara. I was good at mathematics in the specific way that some people are good at mathematics, which is not just that the numbers make sense, but that they make sense the way a language makes sense, structurally, intuitively, so that reading an equation feels like reading a sentence, and the sentence has meaning beyond just its correct answer. My father, who was a construction foreman, used to bring home blueprints and spread them on the kitchen table and explain them to me when I was 10 or 11, and I understood them the way other children understood picture books. I was always going to study engineering. It was not a decision so much as a recognition. I completed 2.5 years of my degree. Then my father had a stroke. He survived the stroke, which I want to say immediately because the story is complicated and I don't want you to carry the wrong weight through it. He survived and he recovered substantially, enough to walk and to speak and to return to a partial version of his work. But recovery takes time, and recovery takes money, and I was the eldest and the best positioned to do something about the money, which is a specific position that eldest children of certain families know with their whole bodies. The weight of it, the way you don't even discuss it, because there is nothing to discuss. I came to the United States on a work visa. My original plan, and I say original because plans change, and I want to be honest about the fact that this plan changed so many times, it barely resembles what it started as. My original plan was to work for 1 year, send money home, return to school in Mexico, finish my degree there. 1 year became 2 years because the money was needed for longer than expected. 2 years became 5 years because my father's recovery plateaued and then declined and then stabilized, and the support needed was ongoing. 5 years became 11 years because by then I had a life here, a real life, a network, an apartment I had furnished one piece at a time, and a job I was good at, and a community I had built person by person. And going back felt like a different kind of loss than staying felt like. I cleaned offices. I want to be specific about this because I think there is a way of telling this part of the story that makes it sound like a temporary condition or a minor detail. And it was neither. I cleaned offices for 11 years. Office buildings in downtown Columbus, mostly financial firms and law firms, and one very large technology company whose offices I came to know better than most of the people who worked there ever would. I worked the night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week, because the night shift paid more, and because the night shift meant I could attend community college courses during the day, which I started doing in year 3, not because I had a specific plan yet, but because I could not stop taking mathematics courses. The way some people cannot stop reading or cannot stop running, it was simply a thing I did because I did not feel entirely like myself when I was not doing it. I should tell you about the building because the building matters. The technology company whose offices I cleaned had, on the 14th floor, an engineering department. Structural engineers mostly, the kind of people who design the systems that hold buildings up. I cleaned that floor on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and I had for several years, and I knew the layout of those offices better than I knew my own apartment, where every person kept their coffee cup, which desks accumulated paper, and which stayed clean, which engineer worked late enough that I sometimes moved around them with my cart while they typed. His name was Robert. He was maybe 60, white-haired, wore reading glasses pushed up on his forehead that he never actually seemed to use for reading. And he was always there at midnight when I came to clean the 14th floor, and he was always working on structural load calculations, large sheets of paper covered in numbers and notations spread across his desk, the way my father used to spread blueprints across the kitchen table. I do not remember which night I said something. I only know I had been not saying something for 3 years. And then, one night, I said it. He had a sheet of paper with a load distribution problem that I could see from where I was emptying the trash near his desk. And there was an error in it. Not a large error, but a consistent one, the same miscalculation carried through 4 steps. And I stood there for a moment, and then I said, in English that was careful and deliberate, because I had been practicing my technical English from library books for years. I think there is an error in step 3. He looked up. He looked at me. He looked at the sheet. He said, "Show me." I put down the trash bag. I picked up his pencil. I showed him. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're right." He said, "How did you see that?" I said, "I studied engineering for 2.5 years in Mexico before I came here." He said, "Why did you stop?" I said, "My father was sick. I needed to work." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Have you ever thought about finishing?" I said, "I think about it constantly." His name was Robert Haynes. He was the director of structural engineering for the company. He had a daughter who had studied engineering at Ohio State and graduated the previous year. He had, it turned out, a specific understanding of what it meant to see something in someone that had not yet had the chance to be what it was. He did not offer me a job. He did not make a dramatic gesture. What he did was this. He wrote down the name of the continuing education advisor at Ohio State, the specific person, with a note that said, "Please see Ms. Chen. She understands non-traditional students." His daughter had gone through her office the year before. He knew exactly who to send me to. He handed the paper to me. He said, "I can't promise anything, but she will know what's possible." I folded the paper and put it in the pocket of my uniform. I want to tell you about Ms. Chen because Ms. Chen was the first person who laid out the actual path in a way that had real numbers and real steps. Ling Chen had been the continuing education advisor at Ohio State for 19 years. She had, in those 19 years, helped students return to their education after gaps of 2 years and 10 years, and in one case, 26 years. She had a system. She had seen nearly every obstacle that could exist between a person and a degree. She looked at my transcripts from Mexico, which I had carried with me since the day I arrived. 23 years in a folder that had been replaced 3 times but always contained the same papers. And she said, "This is more than you think. You are not starting from the beginning. I had enough credits to transfer, with some examination, to skip the first 2 years of the engineering program. I would need to pass placement exams in mathematics, physics, and Spanish to English technical translation. I would need to maintain a B average to keep my financial aid, which I would be applying for, and which she had reason to believe I would receive given my circumstances. It would take, at full-time pace, 3 years. At the pace I could actually sustain given my work schedule, which she understood was not negotiable immediately. It would take 5 to 6 years. I was 41 years old. 5 to 6 years would make me 46 or 47 at graduation. I said, "Is that too old?" She looked at me over her glasses and she said, "How old will you be in 6 years if you don't do it?" I said, 47. She said, "There is your answer. I enrolled that September." I cannot describe adequately the quality of exhaustion that defined the next 6 years. I have tried, and I do not have words that are sufficient. I cleaned offices from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I slept from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. I was at the university by 2 p.m. I studied until 9 p.m., and then I worked again. I did this 5 days a week. On weekends, I studied. I studied in the break room of the office building at 2 a.m. I studied on the bus. I studied in the way that people study when studying is not a choice, but a survival mechanism. When the alternative to the next chapter is losing the thread of the only path you can see. There were 4 semesters where I almost stopped. I am going to tell you about each one briefly because I think they matter. The first was in year 1, before anything had gone wrong from the outside. I was 41 years old, sitting in a differential equations class, surrounded by students who were 19 and 20. And I sat down with Ms. Chen and said, "I don't think I can do this. Not the work I could do." I meant the sitting there. I meant feeling like a stranger in a place I was supposed to belong. She said, "Come back next week and tell me again." I came back the next week and didn't say it again. I did not stop. The second was in year 2. My mother called to say my father's health had declined again, and there was a question of whether I needed to go home, and the question did not have an easy answer. I missed 2 weeks of class. I failed a midterm. I sat in the academic advisor's office and said, "I don't think I can do this." Ms. Chen said, "You said the same thing in year 1. I said, "I mean it this time." She said, "You meant it then too." And then you didn't stop. She rescheduled my midterm. She wrote a letter to my professor explaining my circumstances. I did not stop. The third was in year 4. I was 45. There was a student in my structural analysis course who was 22 and who understood everything faster than I did, and who I spent 3 months comparing myself to before a professor, Dr. Okafor, kept me after class one day and said, "I have noticed you watching Marcus when he answers questions." I said, "He's faster than me." Dr. Okafor said, "He is." He is also 22 years old and has had nothing else to do but study for 4 years. You are doing this alongside a full-time job and 20 years of life experience that he does not have. Your analysis has a quality of application that his does not. Speed is not the only thing. I thought about that for a long time. The fourth was in year 5. I was offered a full-time position at a construction company that would have paid me twice what I was earning cleaning offices, and would have come with health insurance, and would have been, by any external measure, an obviously good choice. I sat with the offer for a week. I called my mother. She said, "Mija, you are 1 year from finishing." 1 year. I said, "The money would help." She said, "The degree will help for the rest of your life." She said, "I did not raise you to stop 1 year from the end." I did not take the job. I graduated in May. I want to describe the graduation because this is where I started the story, and I want you to understand it fully. My mother had never been on an airplane. She is 71 years old, and she had never flown. Not once. Not in 71 years of life in Guadalajara. When I told her about the graduation, she said she wanted to come, and I said the flight is 3 hours. And she said, I know. I will come. She flew with my cousin, who has been to the United States twice before, and who held her hand through the whole flight and who texted me from the plane. She is looking out the window, and she keeps saying que bonito, so beautiful, over and over. She was in the auditorium in a blue dress she had bought specifically for the occasion. Someone near the entrance had been handing out small American flags to families, and she had taken one, and she held it in her lap through the ceremony. When they called my name, and I walked across the stage, I heard her. I heard her above the entire auditorium. Not shouting. My mother does not shout. But a sound. A specific sound. A release. Something between a laugh and a cry that I had never heard from her before and that I understood completely. After the ceremony, outside in the sun, she held my face in both of her hands the way she used to hold my face when I was small. She looked at me for a long time. She said, "Your father would have been here. My father died in year 3 of my studies. He died knowing I had gone back. He died knowing I was on the path." I said, "I know, Mama, I know." She said, "He was so proud. Every time I spoke to him about you at the end, about you studying, he said, Ella lo va a lograr. She is going to do it." He said it like it was not a hope, but a fact. I held her hands on my face. I had a degree that had taken 23 years and 2.5 lives to complete. I am working now. A structural engineering firm in Columbus hired me 6 weeks after graduation. And I am the only person in my department who spent 11 years cleaning buildings before designing them, which I find gives me a quality of practical understanding that has already been remarked upon twice. I know where every pipe goes. I know what the subcontractors actually need. I know what the building looks like from the inside out, not just from the drawings. My mother flew home 2 weeks after graduation. At the airport, she held me for a long time, and she said, "Now I know what airports are for." I said, "You'll come back." She said, "I will come back." She said, "Next time I won't be afraid of the airplane." I have the folder, the one I carried for 23 years with my Mexican university transcripts, the pages worn soft at the corners, the folder itself replaced 3 times. I keep it on my desk at the engineering firm next to my Ohio State diploma. I have a note from Robert Haynes in that folder now. He sent it when he heard I graduated. It said, "I knew from that night at the desk. I never doubted it for a moment. I have not doubted it either. Not after the first year, and not after the third, and not after the moment. I almost took the other job, and not after my father died, and not after any of the other moments where I could have stopped and did not." My father looked at blueprints spread on a kitchen table and taught me to read them like sentences. I build the buildings now. She is going to do it. She did.